Welcome, everyone, back to the Podcast of Champions. I'm David Woods from Bruin Report Online, the UCLA site on the 24/7 Sports Network.
And I'm Ryan Abraham from USCFootball.com, the USC site on the 24/7 Sports Network. And together we make the Podcast of Champions, talking all things formerly Pac-12 football. We got some exciting stuff today because we're going to talk Washington, the Washington Huskies, heading into the Big Ten. You know, the last season in Pac-12 history, great season for Washington. Second best in the Pac-12 to Oregon, who everyone thought should have beat Washington every time they played, but somehow Washington won. But, you know, second best isn't bad. No, I'm just kidding, of course. Going to the national championship game, Heisman finalist, Michael Penix. Awesome stuff.
But how many off-season natties? That's the real question.
You need some of those, yes. Yeah. Oregon's got those down, but Washington's got the results in the field. And we're going to talk about the future of the Huskies going to the Big Ten. Spring ball is going on right now. Chris Fetters from dogman.com knows it all. Chris, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, guys. It's good to see you again.
So good.
It's nice.
I can't see you right now because Ryan sets this thing up so poorly. But
I'm the producer.
I'm imagining you, Chris, in my mind's eye. That's what I do actually most of the time.
He's got.
I got a frozen screen, guys, so I don't know what's going on.
Oh no! If your screen's frozen, I can kind of mess.
Frozen in time.
Yeah, we can hear you. I'll mess this up around a little bit, and maybe it'll get you back.
There we go.
Chris, you got it there now.
Yeah, we're good.
You can see all this. Okay. See, I'm just fixing stuff on the. That's what the producer does, David. You got to like produce, host, do all that.
There's
crap.
A lot of bickering today. We should probably we should smooth this out.
Should we get into?
Yeah, we should get into a glide path and just bring this one home. Chris, let's talk about Washington. We brought you on here not to listen to us bitch and moan at each other, but to talk about Washington's football program. Been a crazy. 4 months. Washington has an excellent season under Kalen DeBoer. Makes the national championship game. Everything is awesome. You know, Michael Penix is in the Heisman race deep into the season. And then everything happens. They hire Troy Dannon as the AD to replace Jen Cohen, and then he leaves. Before that, Kalen DeBoer leaves for Alabama. Jedd Fisch is hired from Arizona. Somewhere in there, Mike Hopkins is finally fired. What's this been like to cover for you, and also give everyone some insight into what's gone on with the athletic department between kind of the two ADs now?
Yeah, it's as you guys can tell, I just woke up. I've been taking cat naps basically for the last 120 days. It's between that and some siestas maybe every once in a while in the afternoons. That's been kind of where we're at here in Seattle. Yeah, it was. I do really feel bad for Washington fans in general because they just didn't even get a chance to experience or take in the whole national championship experience. Yes, I mean, it was a bad game for them, resulted in a loss and all that stuff, but just soak it in, the feeling and just the achievement of going 14-1 to get to that point. They just didn't get a chance to experience it at all because 2 days after that, the coach has gone to Alabama. 2 days after that, they hire the coach from Arizona and Jedd Fisch, and then they're off and rolling. You still have recruiting going on then. You still have the portal going on then. And obviously all that stuff with football is going on. Troy Dannon is kind of, taken over for Jen Cohen, who's now at USC. And so you've got all that rolling. And then in the backdrop, you've got obviously basketball going on at the same time. And Mike Hopkins, it just really feels like the writing's on the wall for him. And the closer and closer you got to the end of the season, it's like, okay, it really feels like they're probably going to pull the cord on him after 7 seasons. So who is Troy Dannon going to take over? And then right before that all happens, he goes to Nebraska. And it's like, wait a second, you haven't even been here 6 months and you're already off to a competitor in the Big Ten. It's like, it didn't even really make sense other than the logistics of it because he's an Iowa guy. And so him and his family going back to the Midwest, those types of things, that makes sense. Gets a little bit of a bump. I think he got about a 60% bump in pay. So I'm sure that was attractive to him. And so then now it's like, okay, Washington's looking for a coach. And at the same time, they're looking for an AD. And credit to the president of Washington, Anna Marie Kause. She reacted quickly, went to get a guy in Pat Chun, who obviously Washington knows really, really well because of his time at Washington State, grabbed him up really quickly. And I'm sure he was grateful to come from Washington State to Washington because Washington's going into a Power 2 conference. Washington State, their situation's obviously still very much in limbo. And so for him to come over, very competent AD, I think a lot of people thought he was in line for the Ohio State job, which is where he's originally from. So to get him and literally Danny Sprinkle from Utah State, like on consecutive days was pretty amazing because right then, that exact week, I can still remember it, that exact week, the Pro Day was going on at Washington. We covered the Pro Day and Pat Junn's press conference almost side by side. And then the day before was a big press conference kind of leading into spring practices with Jedd Fisch and the two coordinators that he brought in, Brendan Carroll and Steve Belichick. And then right after that afternoon, they had an introductory press conference for Danny Sprinkle. Usually those types of announcements and those types of press conferences are spread out through the entire week. We had all four of those within 24 hours. That's just kind of a microcosm of what Washington has had to go through and what they've had to deal with these last 3 to 4 months.
That's covering USC. We call that like Tuesday. Yeah. It's quite
the car wash up here. I mean, it was like going through the rinse cycle about 10 different ways.
Yeah, no, I feel for you because I've done that before. Where this was usually the USC stuff has been incompetence at high levels, making horrible decisions, and that's why you get this, major story after major story. But just a lot broke, and I think with not Washington's fault, it's just one of those things where you're probably better off without Troy Dannon there, right? I mean, you make a hire at AD, it probably wasn't the right fit. It's better to kind of move on and go from there. I mean, you needed to, go in a different direction for basketball. And it was weird being at the Pac-12 championship, knowing that he was, dead man walking, right? Like he was like coaching, but he's not going to be around. So just a lot of kind of weird stuff.
Yeah. The tough thing is, guys, when the implosion of the Pac-12 as a conference was imminent, and the history is, if you listen to the Washington State fans talk about it, Anna Marie Kause is the reason why the Pac-12 imploded. Well, that's not entirely true. She may have been the one that literally delivered the death blow, like when it actually happened. But the bottom line is Washington was improving their situation and going to a Power 2 conference. They were on the haves on this battle between the haves and the have-nots. This kind of stuff wasn't supposed to be happening to a program that was making a move into a Power 2 conference. You were supposed to be the ones that was poaching coaches, poaching players, poaching people from the transfer, doing all those types of things, being on the right side of all of the nonsense that would happen down the line. But as we've seen, obviously, with the portal, as we've seen with these coaching changes, Alabama makes a switch when Saban retires. They pick off Washington's coach. Well, Washington needs a coach, so they pick off Arizona's coach. Arizona needs a coach. They pick off San Jose's coach, and on down the food chain you go. And it's really it's just kill or be killed now in the Pac-12 or the old Pac-12, and now it just feels like it's Wild Wild West all over again.
Yeah.
Obviously the other big thing from this offseason, and this is recent and pretty unsettling news, was Tybo Rogers being arrested earlier this month for 2 rape allegations. I think he's since been charged. This was ongoing during the season, and I know he was suspended for a brief time by Kalen DeBoer, but then was allowed to play during the college football playoff. What's your sense of how Washington is handling this now, and also what kind of how this reflects on Kalen DeBoer and Troy Dannon, but also how they're handling it now? Jedd Fisch obviously had the issue with Jayden DeLaura, where he allowed him to play under not quite the same circumstances, but similar circumstances, where Jayden DeLaura had been credibly accused of rape or sexual assault when he was in high school. So what's your sense of what's going on with Washington with that?
Well, I would speak from a point of view of knowing enough of the information to just be very dangerous about it in general, because there is a lot of hoops that you have to go through with these types of allegations. not just through the athletic department, but also through the upper campus here at Washington. And a lot of these cases, when they are alleged and they go through the chain of command all the way up through to, the president or what have you, those types of things usually get taken out of the hands of the coaches and the athletic administrators. They actually go higher than that. And there's Title IX issues involved and everything else. So really, what was interesting is obviously on first glance, once you find out the allegations, and there was 2 separate episodes, I think in October and November of last year, that Tybo Rogers was involved in, and yet he was only suspended for the one game. I think it was the Apple Cup, and maybe did he come back for the Pac-12 title game? I can't fully remember,
but
I
do remember. I know he was back for the playoff.
Yeah, he was definitely back for the Sugar Bowl. I know that. I don't think he even played in the national championship game. But all that said, I think a lot of those things, once those allegations are far enough up the ladder, so to speak, they're taken out of the coach's hands. Like, they don't have a choice. So I think when it comes to what DeBoer had to do, what Troy Dannon had to do, I think a lot of that stuff was taken away from them anyways. Like, he's automatically done. And as far as Fisch, and I don't know really the details of the stuff with Delora, but he was pretty definitive when he talked to us about it that, pending the stuff that's going on with Tybo now and the things that have come out, he's suspended at a minimum. And he really pretty much said he's not coming back. So, right. There's that. And I think there was even another issue with another player that was separate. It wasn't involved in the Tybo stuff, but there was some stuff where they were kind of together, but it wasn't sexual nature. It was more of felony type stuff other ways, and they're gone. So it's just one of those things where I think it's done deals as far as some of these guys when they just when they have opportunities to maybe have a second chance. And then because Tybo was even suspended even in the fall, even before, like in fall camp and stuff, and like he had chances, and he wasted those opportunities. And I really hope for his sake that none of this stuff is proven to be true, because it sounds awful. It really sounds awful what's going on. And I feel awful for the other people involved, and it's just a horrible situation all the way around. But as far as his career at Washington, he's done. He's done.
I want to talk about the current team, because obviously a lot different than last year with, going to the national championship like we talked about. You mentioned Jedd Fisch coming in, Will Rogers coming in from Mississippi State, potentially the quarterback there. What, I think 2/3 or so way through spring football, what have you seen? How, different the team look, the transfer portal additions, like what's kind of going on, with Washington football right now?
Ryan, I think the biggest thing that you can say after the first few weeks is that this team is really leaning in to their NFL pedigree. This is a situation where Jedd Fisch obviously came from a lot of different stints in the NFL. He knows a ton of different coaches in the NFL, has coached under Hall of Fame coaches like Pete Carroll, like Bill Belichick, and he's used those connections to the utmost effect and to the maximum impact that he can. He is trying to use it not just to impress the current players on staff, but he's also wanting to use it in recruiting. He's wanting to use it, frankly, in NIL, saying that NIL is great. We want to be competitive in NIL, but the real matter of the fact is NFL is greater than NIL. And that's been a big component of his approach and kind of his selling points to Washington for recruits, is that if you want to get coached up and you want to get to the league, don't worry that much about NIL right now. We'll take care of you. But ultimately, what you're going to find is when you get to the NFL, that's where the real money is made. And so you want to be focused on that. Think about that carrot. Don't worry so much about the near term. Think about your long-term development. Think about your long-term prospects and putting in the effort to get there. And he's going to use this upcoming draft in a couple days as a real selling point too, because Washington could have probably a dozen guys get drafted ultimately, and maybe a few more after that pick up some free agent deals. So I think that's really honestly the biggest thing right now that I've noticed is that he has leaned heavily into his NFL pedigree, leaned into it in terms of like when the coaches clinic came around in earlier this month. Not only were the coaches on the staff used like Steve Belichick, like Brendan Carroll, guys with NFL pedigrees of their own, but they brought in their dads. Pete Carroll wasn't a part of it, but he's been at practice lately. Bill Belichick was a huge part of their coaches clinic, and we actually watched him on the field one of the practices. He was literally coaching. He was out there literally coaching some of these guys like Carson Bruner, Alfonso Dupatala, some of the linebackers. He was out there kind of pointing some things out, probably giving them some tricks of the trade, that kind of thing. Jack Del Rio's been out there because his son's part of the staff. And so, again, just fully, just diving in with both feet saying, guys, if you want to be a pro, if you want to get coached up by guys that have been in the pros, come to Washington. That will be the biggest selling point. So I think that's been the biggest deal so far. I can dig into specific position battles if you guys want, but I think ultimately that was the first thing that really hit me about the differences between what Jedd Fisch has done compared to maybe what Kalen DeBoer has done. Because Kalen DeBoer was culture, all that, and Fisch is definitely all about culture. I mean, they teach the competitive thing as much as anybody, but I think it's that NFL touch, that getting to the next level, getting developed. These are the coaches that can get it done. They have pedigrees of their own. They've shown that they can do it. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing I've seen so far.
Washington angers me in a lot of ways because they have twice now in 2 head coaching searches hired the guy that I thought UCLA should have hired at a particular moment. Nice. They hired Kalen DeBoer when I thought they should have fired Chip Kelly and tried to hire Kalen DeBoer in 2021. Then Jedd Fisch, who I thought was a perfect fit for UCLA, who Jedd Fisch thought was a perfect fit for UCLA. Chip Kelly was not fired in November, making that impossible. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. I think Jedd Fisch is going to work out great at Washington. So I want to get into some position battles, but I do want to talk about, this is a very weird and unique situation that Jedd Fisch and Danny Sprinkle are both dealing with, which is Danny Sprinkle, correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline, had negotiations with Troy Dannen, had a contract ready from Troy Dannen, but didn't actually sign the contract until Troy Dannen had already bounced. So he had to sign on when he didn't know who his boss was. Jedd Fisch signed on thinking he was going to be under Troy Dannen. Now, Pat Chun, oftentimes when an AD comes in, they want to have their own people. Pat Chun's inheriting the 2, most important coaching positions. How are those relationships developing here early on between, head coaches who are very recently hired and an AD who's very recently there, and, they need to kind of be rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, David, you got the timeline 100% correct. So Dannen goes and hires Fisch, starts the negotiations for Sprinkle, and then he bolts. So Fisch ultimately is the one that's really on the hook here because if you know what's going,
Fisch is on the hook. I like that.
I came prepared, boys. I came prepared.
I need a sound.
You need a badum-cha.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything.
I'll
give you applause.
Fishing culture up here, boys. So, anyways, point being is that with Sprinkle, if you guys,
sorry, I don't know. That was the wrong one.
If you guys know about his past, he signed on at Utah State when they didn't have an AD or a president. So This guy's used to this type of thing. And plus his background at Washington, his dad, Bill, played cornerback under Jim Owens, who was the football coach before Don James. He grew up, lived, breathed, slept Washington athletics, football, even though he was living in Montana at the time. They would come over. He talked about it in his introductory press conference. Him and his family, they come over, watch football games. He was as invested in UW athletics from an early age as anyone. So he really feels like he's kind of come home in a way. And this was a really big deal for him. And it wasn't, the hiring of an AD wasn't going to stop him from taking this job, because obviously you got a massive pay bump and everything else that came with that. But Fisch, a little different story, obviously, with him, because Dannon was the one that handpicked him and things like that. But again, Washington has done a nice job in picking up Pat Chun, who can really just kind of run with this, and it won't be a problem at all for them because they've invested in what Fisch is doing. They went out and got the coordinators that he wanted, went to the NFL and got Steve Belichick, went to the NFL and got Vinny Cincinnati to be their safeties coach. So they've invested. They understand what's going on. I think the relationship with Fisch and Chun is obviously going to take a little bit of time to develop. But you're absolutely right, David. There's going to be a lot of kind of getting to know you as this thing goes on. You'd obviously like to see that happen a little bit more before these things take place, but that wasn't to be.
Villains are fun, you know. We talked about like what killed the Pac-12. David and I, the teams we cover,
they killed the Pac-12.
They basically like 2 torpedoes in its side. It was going to go down, but just depend on, you know. And maybe Washington was the one that sort of like didn't shut off.
Washington was what's the guy in Titanic? Billy Zane. Washington was Billy Zane.
He didn't
on the
close
Titanic.
the right.
Yeah, he was not the iceberg, but he did grab a child so that he could get on a lifeboat and get the hell away from the ship.
Okay, I like that. There's some of that.
Yeah, but
when you think we've talked to Jason Scheer earlier when we were doing our deep dive on Arizona, we talked Jamie for Washington State last week. When you think about what happened, Washington fans really, you know, Washington, the program really, really, really cheesed off the Arizona fan base. They were pissed that Jedd Fisch left. The Washington State fan base were pissed that Pat Chun left and went to Washington. So I think it's pretty, you know, like you get a few hits or whatever for Washington, but on the way out the door, you get to really kind of like piss off his former conference mates in Arizona and Washington State. So I'm not saying that Washington's the villain there, but leaving like a little bit of a wake behind of some of those fan bases that are upset.
Yeah, the villain tag's fine. It's all good. I mean, to be honest with you, this goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about, I don't think as a Washington fan, when you join the Big Ten and you're on the have side of the have-not argument, these are the types of moves that you would have expected them to make. And so, yes, I mean, they should be going after these guys because they're coveted guys. They're guys that want to be a part of this conference and be a part of this new thing moving forward. But yeah, so the villain thing is fine. I mean, I love Jason. Jason's a good guy. I got nothing but love for Jason. But that said, they're in a position where they should probably expect moves like this to happen.
Yeah.
Because in basketball, it's a different story for them. See, in basketball, you know, they've been, because of what Lute Olson laid in that foundation, they can really eat off that reputation for a very long time. But when it comes to football, it's a much, much different story. And obviously football is still what pays the bills for most schools in this part of the world. So I like I said, I feel for them, but at the same time, there is a pecking order. And right now, when you go to the Big Ten, you're sitting at the adults table. And so you get to kind of reap the rewards of eating at that table and being a part of that conversation. And yes, that's going to piss off a lot of fans, but at the end of the day, it's not personal. It's just, it is what it is. And, you know, Washington got their coach taken by Alabama 2 days after playing in a national championship game. You don't think Washington wasn't cheesed off in a lot of ways? I do think really in hindsight, knowing what we know now, they dodged kind of a serious bullet with Dannon. I think that's fair to say now in hindsight. But at the same time, you know, with how important the AD right now is in college athletics, especially when it comes to hiring these revenue sports coaches, this is a situation where it's super, super important to get these calls right, because there's just too much money involved at this point. And for him to bolt right when he did, the look was awful. I mean, it just was not a great time. It's almost like when your electronics dies. Is there ever really a good time for a piece of like your phone? Is there a really good time for your phone to die? No, not really. It's just one of those times where it's the situation. It is what it is, and you've got to make the most of it. It's like Jedd Fisch this week, or I don't remember if it was no, it would have been at the end of last week on Saturday. After a bit, they had like over 100 play scrimmage, and he was asked about NIL because the portal opened and stuff like that. And he goes, guys, the system's broken. I mean, it's flat out broken. He goes, we'll do what we have to do with it because everyone else has to adjust, and we'll adjust. He goes, but this is an unsustainable situation. We just can't do it the way we're doing it. So,
you don't think you can just hit up fans in perpetuity to pay for players? That's weird. Weird that he doesn't think that's sustainable. Very strange.
Yeah. And that's coming from like a program that probably has a decent amount of money in NIL, but they're not going to be able to compete with the top SEC and the top Big Ten programs. I mean, they're middle of the road at best when it comes to that situation. And so, yeah, it's frustrating, I think, for them specifically. But at the same time, what are you going to do? I mean, you made that deliberate, conscious choice to be in that pool of programs. You want to be a half. And if you want to be a half, you got to act like a half. And that means you've got to come up with the cash because that's all that matters right now. And if you want to follow the programs that are going to invariably be the most successful, you got to follow the money.
Yeah. All right, so getting into just a little bit of unit stuff. The one thing I was reading with all the Washington spring previews was a lot of concern about the offensive line. I remember reading that Drew Azzopardi, the San Diego State transfer, was basically the oldest guy in the room, and he's a sophomore or like a redshirt sophomore, basically.
Yeah, he played like 6 games last year.
Yeah. What's your sense of that at this point? Are they looking to add significant experience in the portal, or are they looking to develop this group? Does this feel like, an offensive line can so often just dictate what an offense is capable of doing? Does that feel like it's going to be an element where it'll push this into being kind of just a building year for Jedd Fisch, or do you think he's going to be able to get it right by the season?
Well, he's made it very, very clear on let's address two different things. First of all, he says this is not a situation where they're rebuilding. He goes, you're coming off a national championship game season. You went 14-1. This is not a rebuild. This is a reload. They've just got to figure out a way to be able to reload. And he was flat out. I mean, he was very transparent the very first time we talked to him after the first practice of spring. He said, if it wasn't for the fact that we have a way to address what we need on the offensive line through the portal at that time wasn't open. But if there wasn't a way to get more talent in the door before fall camp, he would be extremely concerned. And so when the coach is that transparent and that open about what they need to get, especially at a position of need like the offensive line, then you know it's a problem. And you mentioned Drew Azzopardi. He came from San Diego State, played 6 games last year. He is by far their most experienced guy because there's two guys from Washington that are more experienced right now, but they're both injured in Landon Hatchett and Gard Memolar. They have experience, but they can't play in spring right now. They've been very, very limited at most. And mostly it's just been snapping during skelly drills, 7-on-7, that kind of thing. So you look at that, and then you look at the overarching, the overall picture. When you look at the 22 starters that played in the national championship game in January, there's 2 returners, and they're both on defense. You've got Alfonso Tupatala, and then you've got Elijah Jackson, who had to play at the end of the Sugar Bowl game, the cornerback. That's it. Those are the only 2 guys that return. The entire offensive line gone, either to the NFL or to the SEC. So at this point, they've picked up a center from Portland State who was originally from Federal Way. He played at Eastside Catholic, Titi Ali'i. They're going to get a lot more guys. They've had a couple guys on campus. They're going to work. They're going to work every angle they can possibly work to try to see if they can get the best guys possible for the offensive line. But it's basically like anybody that comes in, you're almost assured a starting spot. because outside of as a party, who probably will be their starting right tackle, there's no one else there that should be starting. Let's put it that way. Because if you take Memoir and Landon Hatchett out of the picture, every single one of the scholarship offensive linemen right now so far this spring are either true freshmen or redshirt freshmen. And they've got 2 true freshmen coming back in for the summer that aren't here yet. They're graduating high school. So they'll have a couple more bodies. And we know also Fisch's history at Arizona. He is absolutely not afraid to play true freshman offensive lineman if he needs to. But again, that was part of a total rebuild. That's not for a team that's quote unquote reloading. So they've got their work cut out for him. And Brendan Carroll is absolutely on the warpath to try to find some offensive linemen to help him out. And again, I have a feeling this is going to go back to what you guys were saying about Washington being the villain, especially when it comes to Arizona. I'd watch out, Wildcats. You might get pillaged one more time.
Oh.
2 more times, or 3 more times, or 4 more times. I have no idea what the over-under is going to be.
Put a picture up. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, but they won't be getting Noah Fafita. That's not the guy they're going to be getting. We're talking about guys in front of them.
Okay, interesting. Let's talk quarterbacks real quick because there's been – look, we kind of joked before we came on the air. Jake Browning signed a 2-year deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. He's no longer – I know we joke. He's no longer at Washington. He's in the NFL
He finally wrapped up his Washington career last year.
Yeah. But curious what you think about Michael Penix and where he's going to go in the draft. I voted for him for the Heisman #1. Jane Daniels ended up winning, but he was a Heisman finalist. There's a lot of talk about where he could potentially go in the draft, and then Will Rogers coming in from Mississippi State, if he's going to be the quarterback of the future, or what that battle's like, and if there's anybody else that Washington could try to get in the portal this cycle.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to get any guys from the portal this particular cycle. They've got the 3 quarterbacks right now. So they've got Will Rogers from Mississippi State, and he's pretty clear the #1 guy right now just because of his experience. I mean, you're talking about in terms of total yardage in the SEC, he's the #2 quarterback in the history of that conference in terms of total yards. So he brings a wealth of experience. He actually started as a true freshman under Mike Leach, which never happened. So it's really good that they brought in a guy with that kind of experience because he's going to be able to adapt, and because this is going to be a lot more. This is going to be a lot more pro style, a lot more in the mold of what like Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, that type of offense. That's the kind of offense that Jedd Fisch runs. And so it's going to be a little different. He experienced a little bit of a pro style last year under Zach Arnett, but before that, it was all air raid under Mike Leach. So it's going to be a little different, but he's by far the #1 guy right now. But I'll tell you what, the guy that's probably made the biggest jump overall of any position at Washington this spring is the backup, Damon Williams. He's true freshman. He was a guy that Jedd Fisch and Jimmy Doherty, the quarterback's coach, they absolutely coveted him, got him to sign with Arizona. And then when the change was made and Fisch came to Washington, he got out of his letter of intent and then signed one with Washington. If you wanted, so you guys put the picture up of Noah Fafita. Well, it's interesting because a lot of people thought that maybe Noah Fafita and Teteroa McMillan would go to Washington after Arizona, and it was a big coup for the Wildcats to keep both of them. And I still think that's 100% true. But I think that's going to be tempered a little bit for Washington fans because if there was ever a guy that could fit the mold of a Noah Fafita right now, it is Damon Williams. He is basically Noah Fafita, but I think he's faster. I think he's a better athlete. I don't know if he's a better quarterback overall. I don't know if he's a better game manager. I don't know if he's smarter than Noah Fafita. I have a ton of respect for Noah Fafita. I think he's a hell of a quarterback. But I think if you want to find a guy out there that could follow along that track and be that kind of guy down the road for Washington, it is Damon Williams. He's exciting. He's explosive. He's got a great arm. He's athletically, he's got everything you want. And now it's just a matter of putting it all together in the offense. And then they've got the third guy is another true freshman in Marmar, DeMarcius Davis. And he's really, really good too. But he's a little bit more like Will Rogers. He's more like 6'4", 6'5", 200 pounds, can run around quite a bit. He's more of a combination of the two. I think he's got the athleticism of a Damon Williams, but I think he could fit a little bit more in the play style of a Will Rogers. So I think they've got an intriguing mix. And I think if they stick with those three guys right now, I think they're pretty set. They've got a quarterback already set for 2025 in Dash Byerly, who transferred to Mater Dei. So I think they feel really confident about him. But will they go after another quarterback at some point in the portal? Probably, I would think, if they find the right fit. Because you'd want at least 4 to 5 quarterbacks on the roster if you can get them. And then, obviously, you guys mentioned Penix right off the top of the bat. He might be the most intriguing guy in the draft starting Thursday. Could he go first round? I think there's a lot of people that think that. And the other thing that I've seen lately in the last couple of days, guys, kind of following the mock drafts, is seeing some teams potentially move down to pick him up maybe at the end of the first round and then accumulate other draft picks in kind of a different strategy. So there are some, I've seen them go as high as maybe like 13 to Vegas if Vegas decides not to trade out. But then I've also seen some trades where guys maybe trade out and pick him up maybe in the late 20s. So I think he's as intriguing a prospect as it gets. I really do think the injury stuff is so overblown by now. I don't even know what to say about it. The Players Tribune piece that just came out yesterday from him was fantastic. I think it really says it all about what he is, not only as a player, but as a person. And so can't wait to see him. I know that Mel Kiper on his big board on ESPN has 9 Washington players in his top 150, which includes even Jack Westover, who didn't get a chance to compete at the combine in Indianapolis because he was banged up. But then you've got Devin Culp, who's another tight end who ran the fastest of all the tight ends there. So the talent at Washington is there to go big in the draft. And I guarantee you, Jedd Fisch and the coaching staff starting Thursday are going to use the results of what happens in this draft to the absolute maximum and say, look, this is what the last staff did. We're going to continue that trend. We're going to make sure that the guys in this staff, like, the seniors like Carson Bruner, Tuputala, all these guys that stuck around and were loyal to the program, they're going to get developed and they're going to go to the league just like these guys are going to go to the league starting on Thursday.
Want to wrap up a little bit with the schedule. This is obviously Washington entering the Big Ten for the first time. What's your sense of the schedule? Looking at it, non-conference is obviously very strange because it's Weber State, Eastern Michigan, and then Washington State
Apple Cup
in September. But what's your sense of the schedule? Honestly, looking at it, I'd say the Big Ten generally was pretty fair with Washington. Didn't stick them with a bunch of tremendously tough road games in the first year. But what's your sense of it and how this shook out for Washington?
Yeah, and purple on purple to start Big Ten play.
Northwestern
coming to Seattle. That's pretty cool.
So it is interesting, guys, and it is funny that you guys mentioned the Apple Cup right off the bat, because for years and years, even growing up, I remember those Week 1 games at Mile High between Colorado and Colorado State going, what in the world are these guys doing this in-state rivalry like in September? This is absolute nonsense. What the hell are they doing? I don't get this at all. And now, of course, Washington's going to experience it firsthand. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with the series moving forward. I do know President Kelsey has been strong about their insistence that they would like to keep the cup going as much as they can. I just don't see the upside in playing a game in Pullman right now. It just doesn't work for Washington. You're giving away a premier, like a potential A slot for a big time non-conference game. I mean, you really are. And nowadays, especially with the playoff the way it's going to go, it almost feels like what your non-conference schedule could be even more important, because you're battling even more teams for those final spots when you're looking at 10, 11, 12, what have you. And you want to be maybe one of those teams that isn't winning your conference, but is strong enough to get consideration to get into the playoff, for instance. And maybe by that time, they're all the way up to 16 or 24 or however many teams they're going to have. So I don't even know about that. What I will say about the schedule itself in terms of the conference, the thing that really stuck out is that there's going to be a lot of weird road trips. And I mean weird road trips like places that are hard to get to. And we're living in Seattle. And in Seattle, it shouldn't be hard to get hardly anywhere. but I don't know. I've never been to Iowa City. I've never been to Happy Valley. I've never been to any of these places. And so, like for instance, Penn State, I think you got to fly into Pittsburgh and then you got to drive like 2.5 hours from there to get to Penn State.
Penn State's tough, and they have an airport, but you can't get a plane big enough to have enough fuel from the West Coast to land there. Like the planes are too big. So you can't get there in a direct flight no matter what you do.
Yeah. So even like the charters for the team, direct charters, you still got to fly into Pittsburgh, right? I mean, you got to bus everyone in. It feels like it could be, I don't want to get too crazy about my pop culture references here, but it just feels like you're going into a place where maybe you shouldn't be going. Because it's that far removed in terms of, we're talking 2024 now. We're not talking about 1924. And so that's interesting. Again, the Iowa trip, I think is so amazing because you see what they do at the end of the first quarter with the Children's Hospital. Can't wait to see how that, that's like I really, ever since I saw that, I'm like, that's got to be a bucket list thing. I think that's fantastic. And then obviously the red letter game for Washington in terms of playing at Husky Stadium is the Michigan game. It's not going to have the marquee value in terms of being one of the top conference games of the entire season, which is unfortunate because in almost any other circumstance it would be, because you'd have a ton of guys coming back and it would have a real grudge match feel to it, but it's not going to have any of that kind of feel whatsoever because everyone's gone. DeBoer's gone, Harbaugh's gone, McCarthy's gone, Penix is gone, everybody's gone. And so it's going to be like, it's almost going to be like, who's going to show up? It's like both teams are going to have the colors, both teams are going to have the helmets on, but who are these guys that are going to be playing? Because none of them played in the national championship game. Like basically none of them did. Yeah. So I'm really intrigued to see what that's going to be about too.
I find it interesting. I like the schedule because there's some nostalgia. You get 4 former Pac-12 teams, Washington State, you mentioned, but playing Oregon, rival, playing both USC and UCLA. So you kind of get that feel for it. Like USC, I think, is only playing 2 former UCLA and Washington. So you get 4 former Pac-12 teams. So, a little more West Coast games. And then, the big games being Michigan, like you mentioned, rematch of the national championship game, at Iowa and then at Penn State. So some big brands out there too. It's like, it's Indiana, Rutgers, Northwestern, maybe not so much, but I like the mix of some nostalgia and then some big name brands, and you avoid Ohio State. So if Washington's having a really good year, maybe you get to play Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. But that's the team on paper that probably had the best off season. And maybe Oregon's up there too. But avoiding Ohio State's probably not a terrible thing either.
No, it's not a terrible thing. But you talk about Oregon playing them in the final game of the season in a weird kind of quirk of fate. Over the last few decades, guys, it feels like Oregon has certainly taken over the true rival for Washington as opposed to Washington State. And now it feels like it's basically been solidified. Now that you play Oregon the very, very last game of the regular season, it feels fitting, right? It feels fitting. Okay, it's going to be around the Thanksgiving. It's going to have the kind of national impact and gravitas that a normal Oregon-Washington game would normally have. And it's going to keep going that way because this last season, you guys mentioned the 2 games that they played, regular season in Seattle, then the Pac-12 title game. Those were slugfests. Those were absolute battle royals. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, regardless of whether you're playing in Eugene or Seattle. Those games are going to be just absolute rock fights. And I suspect that playing it at the end of the season where it's going to have maximum impact, not just on what's going on out west, but also what's just going on in terms of the total Big Ten title race, should be dynamic. It should be fantastic. And I think if you're a Big Ten football fan in general, growing up, and then all of a sudden wondering, wow, the nexus of Big Ten football in many ways is starting to shift out west. And you've got these big rivalries, but now all of a sudden they're your rivalries. They're conference rivalries. These things are kind of carrying over, and we'll see how much of an impact that they're really going to have on the rest of the conference. But playing Oregon at the end of the season, it basically just loads itself up to being a fantastic finish for the Huskies. And hopefully it'll be in a situation where both teams have played really, really, really well, and it'll have just that much more meaning in the overall scheme, not just for the conference, but also maybe for the national picture.
Chris, we got a couple of questions in the chat I wanted to pass along, and then we'll let you go. Thank you for your time. Longhorn for Life. At the beginning of the chat, by the way, we had like Longhorn for Life and West Texas Mike, like two Texas guys kind of going at it in the chat a little bit. Do you think Penix goes higher in the draft if the Huskies lose to Texas on the last play and he goes out looking like a demigod because he played really well in that game? Do you think it would have improved his draft stock?
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. I get the point. I think it's a hypothetical. We'll just never know, right? I mean, and I think even in the national championship game, there were some things that he did that that hopefully teams won't hold against him, because again, he came back with the win in that game. I mean, he won that game, and he showed so many good things in that game. But I don't know if it comes to the thing where if that's the reason teams are holding off on him, then it's not a good situation for him anyway. Because I think if it's what's the classic thing, right? If you can't handle me at your worst, you certainly aren't going to get me at my best. And so it's like, I mean, that's the same thing about everyone. I mean, outside of maybe JJ McCarthy, all of those quarterbacks have flaws when it comes to the win-loss record. I mean, McCarthy's the only one that can really pretty much claim I was basically unbeaten from like birth. So it's like, it's just, so yeah, I see the point. I get it. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I really hope front offices aren't using that national championship game as the barometer where they're ultimately like, well, we're just going to flip a coin because for as good as he played against Texas, he didn't play very good against Michigan. And since those are the last two games we got a chance to see, I guess we'll just flip a coin here and see what we should do. I really hope they don't use that against him, because there's so many other things about Michael Penix Jr. that just scream out first round draft pick.
Yeah. There's Washington fans. I mean, it's so funny with Penix and Nix both not sure where they're going to go. It's kind of like a battle, like which one's going to get picked first, so that's kind of a cool aspect too.
I've seen mocks where Nix goes ahead of Penix, and I've seen mocks where Penix goes ahead of Nix. Generally speaking, I've seen more with Penix going ahead of Nix.
Yeah, I think so.
I haven't seen Nix get into too many first rounds, but I think you guys have seen this for every single year. You see a run on a position, and then GMs just lose their minds.
Yeah.
It's just we got to go out now. We got to bump up. We got to draft up. We got to trade up. We got to do these things to make sure we get the guy we want.
Yeah.
And again, not to be cliche about it, guys, but all it takes is one team, right? It just takes one team to fall in love with him, to pick him anywhere. I mean, I'd say 99.9% of the mock drafts I've seen out there have Rome Odunze as being the first Husky picked. And I fully expect that will probably happen on Thursday. But would it stun me if someone went and bumped themselves up, traded up to maybe 5 or 6 to get Michael Penix because they think that he could be their franchise guy? Wouldn't shock me at all. Wouldn't shock me at all. Just like it wouldn't shock me if he didn't get picked until like the 44th or 45th pick.
Yeah.
That's how much of a crapshoot I think he is right now in terms of the outside media and their finger on the pulse of what is going to happen to Michael Penix. I don't think anybody knows. I think they're trying to predict the price of a paperclip when it comes to figuring out where Penix goes. I don't think anybody knows.
Well, this question maybe associated with the Seahawks too. Maybe they could take Penix and keep him there. But Mark wants to know, what role is Pete Carroll going to have at Washington?
Well, it was funny because, first of all, he wasn't part of the coaching clinic, which I thought was interesting, even though you would expect he was. So Mike McDonald was part of it. John Schneider was a part of it. So they had tons of Seahawk elements in that coaching clinic, but it wasn't Pete Carroll. What was funny is Pete Carroll didn't really show up to Washington practice until the middle of last week. And then he was just this older guy with gray hair and a nondescript windbreaker just kind of hanging out like on the side. And you would not have known if you were just looking at him from a distance. You would not have known it was Pete Carroll. You just, oh, okay, that's just some guy's dad, like some player's dad. Well, as it turned out, it was some coach's dad. And so that was really funny. And then the second day, Fisch came out and really made a point of making sure Pete Carroll came out, addressed the team at the end of practice. He had a little competitive thing that he did. You could see him getting kind of chummy with Jonah Coleman, the Arizona transfer running back. They were starting to kind of have a little banter back and forth, which I thought was kind of funny. So I think slowly but surely he's ingratiating himself kind of into what's going on at Washington right now. And I'm sure Fisch and those guys were like, come on, we'll take as much as we can get from you in terms of whatever you want to do. So I think Pete, kind of in his style, even though at USC, he was a lot more unabashed about it. I think now he's mellowed a little over the years, and I think he's trying to just kind of find his way and find his footing to see kind of what works well for him. And with the understanding that his son is the offensive coordinator, I don't think he wants to step on toes, and I don't think he wants to make his presence to be any bigger than it needs to be. But I do expect him to be around. Let's put it that way. I think he will be around. I think he is starting to form some friendships with some of the players, and I think we'll see where that takes him down the road, because obviously this is just spring and we've got a long way to go with this thing.
He'll be throwing footballs to the DBs and drills. He loves doing that kind of stuff. So
I'm telling you right now, guys, Steve Belichick is throwing more footballs as a defensive coordinator than I have ever seen from any other defensive coordinator since I've been covering this team in over 20 years. That guy's been throwing he throws 100 footballs every single practice.
That's funny.
All sorts. He's just a guy. He's just a coach. He's just a ball coach. He's just a coach throwing balls around. He's just his presence is so nondescript. I mean, he is his father's son to a T. Unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable. I put the over under on number of words he was going to give to us the entire spring at about 100. I mean, he when he says stuff, he says some pretty cool stuff, but he's absolutely like his dad. It's uncanny. It is uncanny how he is like his dad.
Well, Chris Fetters, awesome job. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing all the insights for the Huskies. Appreciate it. We'll look forward to all your reports and everything going forward. Spring game next weekend. Oh no, it's May 3rd for
It's Dogs in the Dark, Dogs After Dark. I always call it Dogs in the Dark. It's Dogs After Dark. It'll be Friday night, the 3rd.
Friday night, the 3rd. Okay. So go check
He wanted
it out.
to make something special out of it. He had heard that Washington never had more than 10,000 people or so at their spring games. And so now he's trying to get 40,000 people there. Won't happen, but it's good. It's a good aim to have. You got to have goals.
Nice. So, well, Chris Fetters doing a great job covering
Washington Huskies.
We didn't play the sound effect before. So thanks so much, Chris. We appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys. We'll talk soon.
All right. And everyone else will be back in a minute. Take a break, and we'll come back and keep talking some Pac-12 off-season football. Back in a minute, everyone.
Are we back?
All righty. We're back.
Did we come back?
We never left. So
we're still here.
I want to thank Chris for coming on.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Good stuff. A lot going on when you think about it, man. Oh yeah. Head basketball coach gone. Head football coach gone. Athletic director who was new because they had lost one already gone.
Yep.
A lot going on with the Huskies.
Going on with Husky athletics.
And then, like I said, pissing off your former colleagues in Arizona and Washington State by stealing their people that they didn't want to lose. Yeah.
Big yikes.
It's crazy. And pissing off UCLA because hiring the people that UCLA could have hired,
Just pissing me off.
Yeah, it's mostly you.
I think I'm the only one who thinks that way. You're
wearing your UCLA blue. I wore my Husky 247 shirt.
I know.
Just to represent. It's just I have a purple shirt. I was like, wear the purple shirt.
Yeah, it doesn't really look purple on the camera.
It doesn't?
Looks kind of gray.
It does kind of look gray. It's purple.
Yeah, it's a deeper purple. Ryan's cameras are bad. It's a little washed out.
The free studio you get to use.
He's very
that I
washed
paid
out.
for it. That's okay. Good.
No, I paid for every bit of this. I still pay for it every month.
just by showing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fun. Well, that was good stuff from Chris. A couple notes I had. Arizona State finally got their penalties. What'd you think? Just some recruiting stuff. I mean, basically just like they'd already banned for the bowl, some recruiting restrictions.
I mean, it's fair. I mean, none of those people are there anymore except for Ray Anderson doing some bullshit for the university.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, they already they self-punished, and all those people are gone.
Which is what you want. Yeah.
Herm got, what, a 3-year show cause?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that seems right.
I mean, just some poor. And then
Antonio Pierce is appealing, I want to say.
But he's like head coach of the Raiders. Like,
yeah,
why do you care?
keep your options open.
Yeah, just in case. He could take Penix. That'd be interesting if he does that.
Would it be?
I don't know. Raiders.
Interesting's a strong word.
He could be a Raiders guy. I could see that.
Interesting's a strong word.
Do
you find the NFL draft interesting?
I like the NFL. I'm an NFL fan. You are not. So
yeah.
You just don't care once they're gone from college.
No.
Yeah, I do. I like it. And this is a draft where you got like 5 quarterbacks.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know, maybe 2 of them, maybe 3 of them, maybe they all succeed. I don't know. Or half of them are busts, or 3 or 4 of them are busts.
Yeah. You have no idea.
Yeah.
So it's not very interesting.
That's interesting because we don't know what's going to happen. We'll see.
I mean, there's lots of things that you don't know are going to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
Are those all interesting?
I like it. It's intriguing to me.
Okay.
Yeah. ASU lost the quarterback too.
Yep.
Rashada.
Jaden Rashada.
He's back in the portal. So if you remember, he was the one that signed like a ridiculous $13 million deal with a now defunct Florida collective.
I wonder why they're defunct.
And it wasn't real money. He didn't get it, but he goes to ASU. Doesn't look like he's going to be the star. He played some last year, but in the portal again.
Yeah, it sounds like he was more or less going to be beaten out, or had already been. So that's from Chris Cartman's reporting. So probably just a prudent decision for him. And free transfer now for everyone. Anybody can transfer whenever they want. So, yeah. Monkey Paw curled a few years ago because I called for free transfers. I called for you can play for one team 1 week, transfer midweek, and play for another team the next week. And we're so close to that now. And I really, it's one of those like, what hath God wrought? Like, what have I done? Because it's my fault, I think.
You called for this.
Because I called for this on our podcast.
Crap. Yeah.
And then it's like, no, not like this. Not like this.
This is what you wanted.
That scene from The Matrix. Yeah. What are you going to do? Can't win them all. But nice. Jaden Rashada, happy trails.
Happy trails. We also know, the Board of Governors or Board of Directors for the NCAA, they ratified NIL rule changes and transfers. So they said you can transfer as much as you want, like you mentioned. But now schools, programs can be involved in helping players with their NIL deals.
In Virginia?
No, everywhere now. But they can't. We're not at a point where the NCAA said, hey, you can pay the players, but they can now be involved. Because before they were saying the schools can't be involved. So you had a collective, like a third party doing this. Now the schools can be involved in that stuff. And they also declared that the Pac-12, while it still remains a conference for 2 years during this grace period with just Oregon State and Washington State, they will not be part of the Autonomous Five. So officially not Power Five anymore. There's a Power Four. So there's 4 schools with that autonomous tag to them. So that was in that as well. I don't know if you saw that.
I'm looking at it. Yeah, it seems very vague again. The NIL stuff specifically. I think they're just trying to understand everything the NCAA is doing right now as trying not to get sued again, trying not to get in more litigation because they probably are having trouble paying their bills. So they're going to continue to quickly or slowly follow behind all of these, legal cases that are going through at the state level and so on. So what Virginia just did was make it so that I think the schools can now pay NIL to the players or something in Virginia. That's going to be going to be the state of play here pretty soon.
Once a state does it, now everyone has to do it.
The NCAA is losing every single court case that has anything to do with their authority to make rules over any of this shit. So they're going to be getting out of the rule-making business here pretty quickly, and we're going to be in the brave new world here very soon. But in the meantime, they're just going to race to prevent getting sued more.
Yeah, I think the one consistent thing the NCAA has done is they do want to try to keep it a level playing field. So when a state pushes something through, they just have to make it for everybody.
No. I mean, that's the rationale. The reason they're doing it is so they don't get sued.
Yeah, right.
They don't want to get sued anymore because they've been losing. If they'd been winning, they would be fine getting sued, but they're losing over and over and over again.
Yeah. What did you think of the spring games this past weekend?
God, that's hot spring game action. Baby.
I did watch one.
Give me those steaming takes.
I did go to one because I was at the USC one, but that's the only one I've watched so far. Cal, Stanford, and Oregon State had one. There was a lot of Twitter talk. I told you guys last week, Oregon State was going to be on the main Pac-12 network. So people were trying to look for it, and they're like, why is Oregon State on here? Why can't I see USC? And it's like, well, they're on the LA one. And then I think it was Stanford or Cal, I forget which one, was on the mountain one. Or you could watch, so that caused some Twitter consternation, I guess you could say. This weekend, 6 more. Colorado, ASU, Oregon, UCLA, Washington State, and Arizona. And then I think Washington's the last one after that, that Friday, the night one that Jedd Fisch is putting together. So UCLA is UCLA Friday or Saturday? What are they doing? Do you know?
They're this Saturday.
Cover?
This Saturday at the Rose Bowl.
All right. At the Rose Bowl. Nice. Mm-hmm. It's Pac-12 LA.
Is that what it's on?
I don't know, because Washington State has a game, so I'm assuming they're going to get on the main network. Because
I'm not sure if UCLA's is televised. Maybe they just got out of the habit because of Chip Kelly.
Oh, well, it should be televised. I didn't get the television schedule, but 6 more spring games, and then we'll have Washington the final, and I think that's it. So that'll be all she wrote. And I think we only have a couple of questions.
UCLA's will be on Pac-12 LA. JB Long and Greg Camarillo on the call at 2 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Mountain Time.
Nice. Okay. Well, you get to check that out. It's killing me not to watch any of these spring games, but
is it?
Not really. It's conference breaking apart. I tried. I really did. I put an effort when it was a real conference.
You stopped last year. You didn't watch any of them last year either.
I watched Colorado because it was on ESPN.
Yeah, but you stopped carrying this guy.
I stopped carrying the Pac-12 Network.
He stopped paying for the Pac-12 Network last year.
Yeah.
The last year of the conference, he's like, nope, not doing one more year of whatever this is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of Sling or whatever. Matthew in Mountain View wrote in, there goes Dave again, making shit up.
Yeah, I got called out for this a couple of times.
Did you?
I want to say this is not my fault. Please.
Okay. Well, I'll read it for you. Hi, Ryan and Dave. In the last episode, David went on a bit of a rant. He does that. About the Pennsylvania Dutch, making fun of their Dutch accents and made up Dutch language. Just one problem. The Pennsylvania Dutch aren't Dutch. Dutch is, in this case, is a derivation of the word Dietrich or Dietsch.
Well, it's Deutsch. He's gone Dietsch though.
Oh, Dietsch. But sprechen Sie Deutsch? Which translates to German.
Okay, here's the problem, Matthew. I'm getting punished here for a bunch of 19th century East Coast Pennsylvanian Amish fucks who don't know what a Dutch person is versus a German. That's not my fault. That's their fucking fault. and we got to change the nomenclature. All right? Who's
Okay.
with me?
I think you're alone on this one.
Let's storm the Bastille.
He goes on, Dave, I haven't heard your thoughts on this yet, but what was your reaction to Ben Bolch's, shall we say, utterly inappropriate column a few weeks ago comparing UCLA and LSU's women's basketball teams before they faced off in the Sweet 16? To me, the column read like an intentionally offensive diatribe in the Daily Bruin. I know both of you have spent quality time drinking with Ben in Vegas. Was curious about your take. Matthew from Mountain View.
All right. So first, Ben's a friend. So if I sound like I'm soft pedaling a little bit, I'm soft pedaling a little bit. Two, it's so funny you say that sentence, the column read like an intentionally offensive diatribe in the Daily Bruin, because one of my buddies, one of my good friends from the Daily Bruin days, we were texting about it. And he said to me, doesn't this remind you of one of our colleagues, Gil, his column about the state of Wyoming heading into the Vegas Bowl in 2004? And it was exactly that, just like intentionally like egging on, trying to like get more reaction from somebody, and it got a reaction. And this was days before like things went viral. It was 2004. So it was basically like just the entire state of Wyoming writing horrible emails to this guy, Gil. And that's honestly what it felt like. I think so. This is, I mean, it's going to sound like I am soft pedaling. So again, all cards on the table. Maybe I am. I think what Ben ran into with writing that column. So if you haven't read it, don't, because the edited version doesn't even have the bits that were drawing so much ire. He used language. I can't even remember. What was the term? Somebody help me out in the chat. I can't even remember what the really bad one was. Dirty debutantes.
Yes.
Dirty debutantes. So Ben's from North Carolina. If you haven't spent any time in the South, this is going to sound like I am just making excuses and apologies. But if you have spent time in the South, they still to this fucking day have things called debutante balls for young women presented to society for the first time. Now, for people outside of that specific culture, debutante can mean different things or be a totally meaningless word that you have to say Google. And if you Google, quote, dirty debutantes, what is presented to you is a bunch of vintage porn from the late 80s and early 90s.
He wasn't going for
I know
that,
for a fact that he wasn't intending that, because you don't intend that in something you're publishing in the LA Times.
It's
But
one of those major newspapers, right?
what he was going for, and this is the great sin of all of a certain type of sports writers, was he was going for a little alliteration. He was going for something that kind of sounded good, kind of sounded snappy, in that way that sports writerese sometimes sounds snappy. He did not arrive at a good phrase. It was not a good phrase. I would say the perspective of that story was, I think that coming to it from that perspective is something that I think a lot of people who are newly writing about women's sports need to do some self-interrogation about, why am I writing about women this way but men another way? And I think everyone is on a journey of learning and acknowledging your own biases and all that kind of stuff. But I think the combination of the phrasing and then the perspective, the view, putting this all in like, these girls are milk and cookies, these ones are dirty debutantes, instead of, well, okay. And then there was this other component that people called them out for, which I thought was a non-starter, which was the racist, which no, I don't know for a fact, but I think the complexion of the two squads in terms of demographics is exactly the same.
It's pretty similar, I would think. Yeah.
So that was nothing. But I do think, like, okay, how are you writing about women's sports? How are you writing about young women versus young men? And is there something to self-interrogate there? Yes. I think my biggest thing actually was, and this is, again, me soft pedaling, but also me being more of a writer than an editor. You write enough words, you're going to write some shitty ones. Like, you're going to write some words that fucking suck.
We say
really
a lot of
bad.
words, so a lot of our words suck. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do it all the time. Like, I say stuff on here. I'm like, maybe not. I think this was, as much as Ben failed in some ways, I think huge editing fail. Like,
yes,
writer writes something, and it's, say, dirty debutantes. You're an editor. You're a copy editor. You're a sports editor. You're whoever editor. You got to Google that shit. Unless you know exactly what debutante means. But the thing is, and this is something where a writer might write a thing and think, oh, I did that. I know what a debutante is, so I'm going to use that because it's like, oh, they're, on the wrong side of the tracks, women presented to society or whatever. Like, that's what he's trying to present, which not great, but again, alliteration. An editor, the LA Times, most newspapers are geared to write to, I think it's an 8th grade audience. No 8th grader knows what a debutante is. So when you're presented with that, you got to Google that. You got to say, hey, is this something that's colloquial enough? And in the Googling, you've discovered, hey, this is referencing a bunch of vintage porn. We obviously can't use that phrase. We got to go back to the drawing board with this. An even better editor would have said, hey, is there something wrong with our perspective here? Is there something wrong with the viewpoint we're using for this column? And would have self-interrogated at that level before it sees the light of day. This is where I think a lot of people criticizing Ben about it, it comes from, I mean, in some places a very legitimate place, but in some ways a real misunderstanding of the newspaper process. So many layers of fail there that had nothing to do with Ben. There was the initial fail, which, you got to self-interrogate better. Probably not right that way. But then how are there no checks and balances? Because there have to be. Like a newspaper, like when I was at the frickin' Daily Bruin, we had 3 layers of editing before anything even got published there. So what was going on at the LA Times that day?
I think a lot of those layers have been jettisoned because of budget cuts and stuff. I don't think there's as many layers anymore.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a huge part. But anyway, yeah, was that soft pedaling?
A little bit. I liked his apology. I mean, I don't know Ben as well as David, but I usually get to hang out with him in Vegas or wherever, and I think he's a really nice guy. I felt his apology was, heartfelt. Like he just felt like that's not normally like people say like, hey, there's someone makes some kind of like horrible comment and gets like caught and says like, that's not really me, but that's really them. Like just from, I don't know Ben as well, but just from I've never got that impression that he would be writing about 80s porn in his column or anything.
No,
so I think it was a heartfelt apology.
He was immediately embarrassed and like, oh God, what did I do? And then he wrote, I thought it was a very sincere and heartfelt apology. And yeah, I mean, it should be, moving on from here.
You bring up an interesting point because we've seen women's sports like really on the rise, and so there's going to be more coverage. There's more eyeballs. And do you feel like the sports writing community sort of handles it differently? Because I mean, like,
yeah,
if you're talking about like you see that with the South Carolina girl she was drafted like 3rd or something. I forget her name, but
we'll start right there.
She's like
start right there with what you just said. The South Carolina girl. Would you ever, in a million years, say the USC boy who was just drafted?
Or say guy or dude or
whatever.
Yeah,
but you know what I mean? And I'm not even calling you out. I'm just saying like it's the terminology. And I do it too. It's the self-interrogation piece because it is like all this stuff because we don't do it. We don't have the practice of doing it. And so like the terminology, the like lingua franca, the like language that you will use to discuss these things, it goes back to like just like I throw out words and but you don't have. It's 2 things. It's the self-interrogation of your own biases, but it's also like no practice talking about women's sports because we haven't done it, and that's a whole other thing. That why haven't we done it? And because of the popularity, but that goes hand in hand with coverage.
I think if you say like guy or dude but like boy, there's a negative connotation with that too. So like you would avoid that word, maybe I don't feel like there's the same thing with girl or woman. I would probably use those interchangeably, but she's a larger human being. She's bigger than a lot of the basketball players you would see around her. If that was a guy, like who's the dude from who's the I don't want to say boy, who's the guy from NC State that was like
DJ Burns.
And they were talking about him playing offensive line. So you're going to say he's 6'8" or whatever and 355 pounds or whatever he was weighing.
Yeah, they don't even list weights for the
we don't have
women
weights.
basketball players.
Yeah, so for any women's sports, we never talk about weight. So like, well, if it's going to be popular, like, is that going to be a thing? I don't know. I mean, is it so you just have to handle it differently? I'm curious to see how this all works.
It's really interesting because I found that a little bit because I was trying to do some like research and I was trying to because I was trying to get a feel for it because I'm thinking in the very near future we're going to be covering women's basketball in particular more, but probably doing a better job with a lot of this stuff. And I was just like trying to kind of get a because there are two reasons I didn't write anything about women's basketball this year. One is kind of the bullshit, which is, well, it doesn't get eyeballs, but it doesn't get eyeballs because we don't do it. And if we did it, maybe it'd get eyeballs. It's that kind of wishy-washy shit. The other one is I don't know how to write about women's sports. Like I don't really know women's basketball that well. And yes, it's basketball, but it's a different sport. Like it's a what's a good 3-point percentage in women's basketball? What is like how does size, what's the importance of being big in women's basketball or being super tall or all this other stuff because it's a more ground-bound game. You don't have the verticality that you have in the men's game as much. So like what's most important? Is it 3-point shooting? Is it all these different things that, I have to like educate myself on. I have to read up on, and I also have to watch a lot more games before I can write about it educatedly. But that's one that was kind of bothering me is like, well, I can't see how big these women are. And that's an important factor too. Like I can look at them, but I can't just like say, oh, this center has some, real gravity. She's 210 pounds or whatever it is.
Yeah.
This one's 160. That's a string bean, like that sort of stuff. And you don't get it. And it's hard to grasp those sorts of things because it's not covered. And I sort of get the reasons it's not, but I also sort of don't. Like, I think it's a sport. I think everyone accepts these women are extremely athletic. And it's also like, I don't know, like there's fat shaming in men's sports. Like a lot of these offensive linemen, they immediately trim down to like 210 pounds when they're done with school because they don't feel good in those bodies. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm getting crap in the chat for saying the word boy. The word boy is okay. I didn't call somebody a boy. Or, that's obviously, I said that's
West
a negative.
Texas Mike is kidding you.
Oh, he said there's a negative connotation with that. Amy's saying there is a negative connotation with girl. So probably avoid that too. So you could say the woman from South Carolina, I don't remember her name, we don't know. Like if if you're 6'8" and you're built, really thin, it's going to be like 6'8", 225 guy versus like you're 6'8", 250 like LeBron
you see
James.
6'8" guys who are 190.
Yeah. But like LeBron James is like 250 and, it's like he's a freak of nature and just you look at him like, but we're going to say his weight. Caitlin Clark, like she's 6 feet tall. So she's kind of, on the taller end.
Yeah.
But she's kind of thin. So there's 6 feet tall girls that are, or women or that are larger. I don't know. Like,
yeah. Yeah. So I the broader thing about like women's sports, I think I was reading a lot more about it because again, it's just, and it was, women's sports have had moments before. Like they've had moments where it's been a big deal. And there have been kind of proactive decisions that were made sort of oddly. Because it used to be a very well televised sport, similar to men's, and then it wasn't quickly thereafter.
For women's basketball?
Yeah, and it's hard to know what came first, chicken or egg here.
I think it was big, like when Cheryl Miller won her titles.
Yeah.
Like it was big in the early mid '80s.
Yeah, and then it kind of went away again, and a lot of it seems like it's hard to know chicken or egg, but it wasn't covered. Like the major networks dropped it, but it was doing pretty good ratings. So I don't know. It's all kind of hard to kind of get chicken or egg. But I think this is proof the last, 2 years of this, that people will watch and people will pay attention. So it's probably incumbent on us to actually cover it because people give a shit.
We covered it a lot for the site, for USCFootball.com. Juju Watkins was, freshman of the year, whatever, kind of a generational talent. And a lot of people hope she can be like the next kind of Caitlin Clark. So we covered it a bunch. I mean, I covered a couple games in person, which I hadn't done in a really long time. So, we're trying. But like you were saying, don't have a lot of experience doing it. So you want to come from but
you don't have any experience covering basketball either.
True, yeah.
And you do
they bounce that thing. Yeah.
It's a round ball.
It's round.
Yeah, and it goes in a hoop, not between uprights.
Yeah.
In a hoop.
It's in
through
a hoop.
net. Got it.
Yeah, it's tough. Like I like watching like women's volleyball. I'm not as big of a softball fan. I think the field is too condensed. Like if you have a ground ball to the shortstop to her right side, like it's almost impossible to throw them out. I'd like to see the field a little bit bigger in softball. For women's basketball, it'd be great if the net, if the rims were like a foot lower or something, because it's such a below the net sport compared to the guys, which is, above the rim kind of thing. The ball's a little smaller, so it like makes shooting a little easier. But like women's tennis is great. I like volleyball. The net's 8 inches lower, so it looks like there's a similar kind of looking product. I'll watch that. I like watch. I'm not a huge tennis fan, but I like watching the majors. I'll watch
I prefer women's tennis. To men's tennis.
Yeah, like
women's tennis is a better game. It's more rallies, more back and forth, less of the like, oh, I'm gonna ace you, then you ace me, then I ace you, and then like one every 8 games we'll actually have a rally.
You get a break. Yeah, but Caitlin Clark. And that's the problem the sport could have is like, was it just about her or is it about the sport? Because she's the closest thing to like Steph Curry that we've seen, where it's just like she was must see, draining threes from all over the place. She had really good handles, like she could pass, to an extent, and like Eye the Tiger kind of thing. Like she was going to daggers like shooting.
UCLA was really good this year, but UCLA had better attendance, I think, than it's had in forever this year. I do think it's just kind of having a moment, and I think if everyone capitalizes on it appropriately, it could be another tentpole sport. And I do think for a lot of people, the women's game and maybe the WNBA not being quite as predatory towards college athletics as the NBA is.
Yeah.
They generally, the transfer portal is still a thing in women's sports, but generally you got players sticking around a while longer at their
Paige
respective
Beckers
schools.
is sticking at UConn. Like in college, she'd be gone. In men's college basketball, she'd be gone. Right?
Yeah, and all that stuff. I think there's some value in it. Also, for fans who haven't adopted it, who want just that kind of same continuity feel that they used to get from the men's sports, you can get that a little bit better from women's basketball.
Yeah, like we have Amy and Mike in the chat, both in Vegas. The Aces won the last 2 titles. Like they're a popular sport. It's a popular team in Vegas. And
that George Kliavkoff sold for $2 or $3 million.
Unbelievable. And now they're worth like $100 million. He's such an idiot. That's so funny. And and now was it Indianapolis that drafted Caitlin Clark, and like all of the tickets for Indianapolis games are like through the roof now. So that stuff is cool, and that is true. Like I've seen better attendance at USC women's games, and that there was no Caitlin Clark there, so maybe she helped sort of rising tide lifting all the boats, and we'll see if they're able to kind of maintain that. And there's some. It's interesting because you can keep players with NIL, like you can make a decent amount of money in college. You don't need to go to the WNBA. And there's some like WNBA veterans that seem to be sort of down on Caitlin Clark, but she's going to help the whole sport, So, and she seems like a good person. Doesn't seem like she's coming in being a jerk or anything. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess one last question. We went way long on that.
Yeah. Well, I had to carry water and then back away from carrying water.
Yes.
All right. Hey, at least I'm up front with you about what I'm doing. All right. This is from Coach Boyle. Hey, my dudes. Isaiah Rakes got a crystal ball for Auburn. SEC has a rule that you cannot transfer from one SEC school to another. If an SEC player leaves the conference in January and then transfers back in April, are they not violating that rule? Not sure if you are versed in this conference-specific transfer rule. Does the Big Ten have any conference-specific rules like that? Thanks. Just another filthy casual.
Hey, Coach Boyle. So what the rule is if, say, you leave in the January window from an SEC school, you can transfer to another SEC school and be eligible that year. That's just like you can do anywhere else. If you leave in this April window, so if you left like Mississippi State tomorrow, you couldn't go to South Carolina and be eligible to play this year. SEC to SEC, you have to sit out a year if you are transferring from the April window versus the January window. So that's an SEC rule. I don't believe that exists in the Big Ten, to my knowledge. I don't know the specifics of this one, but I would assume you could still play right away. Isaiah Rakes left Texas A&M, came to USC. We've seen this happen a few times. You're there for a few months, and now you're going to leave again. I think because he initially left the SEC school in January, you're probably fine to go back and be eligible this year. It's not like he left an SEC school in April. That would be my guess, but I don't know the specifics of that kind of nuance of the rule. Does that make sense? Makes sense to me. Yeah. So I don't know. But is that going to be a thing going forward? I mean, if the SEC's doing it, will the Big Ten do it and then kind of make everyone else do it? I don't know. We'll see. But if you're going to restrict movement, the NCAA doesn't want to do that because, like David said, you're getting sued and stuff all the time. Yeah, I wonder why I'm sure someone could sue the SEC for saying you can't play right away, and they might have to back down. I don't know. But they got more power than the NCAA, I think, so maybe not. All right.
Beautiful.
That's all we got. Anything else?
I have nothing else. I'm tapped. I'm juiced. There's no moisture left in my body.
Very much
Certainly
juiced.
No thoughts, no words.
Yeah. We had a long women's. Yeah. I want to know, are we going to have women's weights listed on rosters?
That's the only thing Ryan wants to know.
I want to know that.
When are the weights going to be listed?
I am definitely open to covering women's sports, especially when there's interest.
Just list those
I want
weights.
to see some weights.
I get it. I understand.
And it's not like they have to be real, right? Like
no. Make it like World Wrestling. I don't care.
Guys like fudge height, weights all the time. Like that's okay if you want to fudge your weight, fudge your height. Like that happens.
But guys are always fudging them up.
It depends. Like sometimes, usually you're fudging them up. So maybe not.
Unless you're Shaq. Shaq is always fudging down.
When you're
when you're pushing 400.
Then you're like, It's funny. I was watching the NBA on TNT and like Charles and Shaq arguing about who's like not as fat as the other one. And Charles was on some kind of like weight drug or something. Those guys got big. But they're fun. That's a really funny show. You're not an NBA guy at all, right?
I used to be. I'm not anymore. I don't have time. I don't have time to watch because if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. Like, I don't watch sports casually because I'm a psychopath. Like, I watch them and I'm, like, into them, and I'm, like, trying to, like, pay attention to it, and it's just, like, I can't do that anymore. Like, when I was a baseball fan, I watched, I don't know, 140 fucking games a year of the team I'm trying to watch. Like, that's not good. That's not healthy. Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
So, no, I'm a sports absolutist, so I got to kind of pick the thing, and luckily I turned that into my job. So it's UCLA football and UCLA basketball.
Last night was a really good doubleheader. I didn't really have much to do. It was Philly looked like they were going to beat the Knicks, and the Knicks end up winning, and the Lakers were up 20 in the second half on Denver, defending champs. They've lost to them 10 times in a row, got swept last year in the Western Conference Finals, and blow it. And Jamal Murray drains a mid-range jumper at the buzzer to beat the Lakers. It was heartbreaking for Lakers fans. And I tweeted out, I don't know if you saw this, like every time you look up a dude, you're like, oh, Jamal Murray, where did he play? Oh, Kentucky. All these guys that are like stars of their NBA teams all played at Kentucky.
John Calipari has had insane talent, and he turned it into one national championship.
I'm like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
All these dudes are.
No, it's crazy. It's crazy when you go back and look at it. Go back and look at the Kentucky rosters. I mean, actually, start with those like last two Memphis rosters and go all the way through Kentucky. It's insane the level of NBA talent.
Because he won a title with Anthony Davis, and there was a couple other like.
Yeah, 2012. That was like an all-star team.
Yeah,
like an NBA all-star team.
Right, but you look at the guys in here, it's like, oh, and there's role players like there's like the Jared Vanderbilts or whatever on the Lakers, but they also have like Anthony Davis, like so the second best player on your team, or Jamal Murray. Okay, he's not as good as Jokic, but he's like the second best player on the team.
And I mean, they had Anthony Davis, John Wall, De'Aaron Fox, DeMarcus Cousins, Julius Randle, Tyler Ulis, Willie Cauley-Stein, Jamal Murray, Malik Monk, Karl Anthony Towns. Yeah, like it's fucking crazy.
These guys are like, superstars on their teams, like, oh, and how did you not assemble that into some more than one championship like 12 years ago or whatever it was?
Yep. No, it's crazy.
Part of the reason why he's gone, I guess. Okay. But if you can get those kind of dudes at Arkansas, man, they would love it.
Those kinds of men.
Yeah.
Those kinds of young men.
I can say guys. I'm not allowed to say guys.
You can say guys. Dudes.
Dudes.
Can we finally, as a society, just agree that dudes can be ubiquitous and we can just use it for everybody?
I'm good with that.
Dudes or guys. Is that okay?
What's the equivalent dude like for women?
Well, that's the problem. Is I think it was always, chicks. But that's
you
like
can't say
it
that.
Depends on who you're talking to, whether that's acceptable or not. Like, and it's just like I don't know.
So dudes was equivalent to chicks?
I think so.
Okay.
But now you can't do that anymore. And so I don't know. I really don't know. I think it's just women. Because if you do girls, unless they literally are like, unless it's girls basketball in high school, that's not great.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's a tough world out there. We gotta arrive at a colloquialism that works, that makes sense, that nobody finds offensive, that tugs at all the right things.
We have a public service announcement from Amy to end the show. Don't fudge your weight, height on dating apps. Okay, so that's fair. So we can fudge it on rosters in college and professional sports, but don't do it on dating apps. Just be yourself.
Yeah,
I think that's the lesson for the day. Should we have a lesson every day?
We should have a lesson of the day. I do think I'm going to leave that question with everyone out there. What is it? Like, what do we do for casual group of women?
Okay.
I want to know.
Gals,
you sound like you're 95.
Yeah. I mean,
like gals is something they say on the Golden Girls to each other.
Yeah. I think the Golden Girls, one of them was like my age on that show, by the way.
Yeah. And it's just,
they were in their 50s then.
I mean, it's weird that dudes became a thing for men generally because it's like literally referring to like some type of cowboy.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. And like an upscale cowboy, like some guy who, but anyway, doesn't really matter.
Would chicks be equivalent to like bros? Like bros, there's like more negative, like, oh, he's a bro or something like.
No, I feel like chicks was like kind of a ubiquitous term, like for just kind of generally like casual all women, but it acquired a negative connotation.
Yeah,
and so then, people don't like it. And maybe it's just kind of the same thing as like, nobody cares if like, like the men's names never have acquired negative connotations because nobody cares about what offends men. And, because it's who cares?
Longhorn for Life says dudine is the correct term for women counterparts.
I feel like he's trolling. I feel like he's engaging in some tomfoolery.
Maybe.
I want to know. I want an answer to this. I'm not stopping until I get.
We
an
are trying to
answer.
solve the world's problems.
This
here.
isn't a world's problem. This is a vernacular problem.
Okay.
But you got to have something, because you brought up a great point. If I can say guys for a guy, because you wouldn't say this man was drafted. You say, oh, this guy was drafted, right?
Yeah.
But you can't say this girl. And guy and girl, those kind of go together.
Sure.
You have to say woman. I guess you can say lady, but that sounds awkward and formal.
Yeah, there's a little formal.
It's not like this gentleman was drafted, you know?
Right.
So we're limiting our language here because we've only got the one word. But on the men's side, we've got like as many different words as you want to use, as long as they aren't racist. Like
or sexist. Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, something to ponder.
Yeah, something to ponder in the intervening moments, because we're not going to be back next week.
I'm going to be on vacation, so
yeah.
we'll we could maybe do one while I'm on vacation. We'll see. All right, well, let's go wrap it up. For David Woods, I am Ryan Abraham. Hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we will talk to you next time.
Goodbye.